So this is an adjunct chapter for the nervous system, endocrine system. I decided to include this because in the older curriculum, older curriculum, particularly in your 5th year, second sem, there's a subject called endocrinology and reproductive physiology. And you will be discussing there the different endocrine glands and the different diseases that is associated with the endocrine system, whether it is toxicity or there's more hormones being produced by a certain gland or less hormones produced by a certain gland. So there is there are diseases that are often being associated with the endocrine system. And also, when we discuss breeding, we've mentioned that these hormones are very important in the breeding cycle, particularly in females. And I decided to have this as I have said, this is an adjunct chapter to the nervous system because it has somewhat a relationship to the nervous system. So the endocrine system is composed of the different organs that secrete chemical signals called hormones without the aid of a duct. So these hormones are often being released directly into the blood. And these hormones usually release in the blood in small amounts and can elicit a physiologic response to its target organs. And hormones are released to maintain physiological homeostasis. When you say physiological homeostasis, examples of this is when I mentioned calcitonin. So calcitonin is being released by the thyroid glands when there is an excess in blood calcium levels. So when there's an increase in the blood calcium levels, calcitonin is being released, and calcitonin is the one responsible in depositing your calcium into the bones. Same also with the parathyroid or parathormone. So this hormone is being released by the parathyroid hormones, and this is being released when there is low blood calcium levels. So this one is responsible in withdrawing calcium from the bones going to the blood. So that's homeostasis, more on the balancing. So later on, when you go in your physiology, this will be discussed even further. Now, the hormones are being regulated through a feedback mechanism. So there are two feedback mechanisms. We have the negative feedback mechanism, which is the consequence of hormone secretion acts directly or indirectly on the secretory cell in a negative way to inhibit further secretion. So an example of this is when the animal gets pregnant. So progesterone is the one preventing the estrous cycle when we go back to your breeding. So progesterone is the one responsible in maintaining pregnancy, while estrogen, while the animal gets pregnant, it's the sustained progesterone levels will prevent the animal from going to their estrous cycle. Same also with animals who are taking, let's say, steroids. The animals have, even us humans, we have the adrenal glands, and that's the one that produces steroids. When the animal is taking steroids, the adrenal cortex, particularly the adrenal cortex, which is part of the adrenal glands that produces the steroids, it will stop producing the steroids because that animal is taking medications for their problem in the form of a steroid. So it will stop. Another feedback mechanism is a positive feedback mechanism. Consequence of hormonal secretion that acts on the secretory cells to provide augmented drive for secretion. Example of this is when the animal, let's say the dog, whelped. Okay, the bitch gave birth to a puppy. So usually we give oxytocin, which is a hormone that increases uterine contraction as well as milk let down. So, however, when there is an individual puppy who is sucking on the teats or nipples of their bitch, it this stimuli will go towards directly to the posterior pituitary glands, which is the one responsible in producing oxytocin, and in response to that stimuli, the posterior pituitary glands will produce oxytocin, thus increasing uterine contraction and milk let down. So there's no need actually to give in a medicine to that if you have a suckling animal. Now we go to the um, different glands. So I'm sorry I did not prepare any PowerPoint presentation. I was planning to, but for this one, it's self-explanatory. It's on your notes. But if you need more more lesson to this, I'm giving you this presentation. So the first gland is the hypothalamus. Now hypothalamus is of my professor back in college would always say that hypothalamus is the master gland, although most authors will put the pituitary gland as the master gland. But you should always remember that there are certain hormones that are produced by the pituitary glands that needs to be produced when they are stimulated by the hormones produced by the hypothalamus. You get me? So they need a stimulant coming from the hypothalamus in order for the anterior pituitary glands in particular to produce these certain hormones. Now we start, so these are the hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus. You have the thyrotropin releasing hormone. We have the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which I discussed in breeding. Corticotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone or somatostatin, and prolactin inhibiting factor. So the stimulus for secretion for thyrotropin releasing hormone, it doesn't have any stimuli. However, its action is to stimulate the pituitary glands to secrete TSH or the thyroid stimulating hormone. The gonadotropin releasing hormone, of course, it's the cycle. So we've mentioned this, the estrous cycle in breeding. So this one stimulates the pituitary glands to produce the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Then we have the corticotropin releasing hormone. When its stimuli is decrease of cortisol levels in the blood, and it stimulates the pituitary glands to produce ACTH. By the way, the hypothalamus is located in the brain. So, and you already know what is its function. And then we have the growth hormone releasing hormone, which it doesn't have a stimulus. However, its action is to stimulate the pituitary glands to produce growth hormone. Then we have growth hormone inhibiting hormone or somatostatin. It doesn't have any stimuli, but however, it inhibits secretion of growth hormone in the pituitary glands. And then we have the prolactin inhibiting factor, which inhibits the secretion of prolactin in the pituitary glands. Now, we go to the pituitary glands, and the pituitary glands is divided into two. We have the anterior pituitary glands, also known as the adenohypophysis. So the pituitary glands is right below the hypothalamus in the brain, if you will know, if you can remember the discussion. And I also noted that part of the sphenoid, there's a fossa on the sphenoid bone, which is the hypophyseal fossa, and that is where the pituitary glands is located. Adeno is actually, when you say adeno, hypophysis is pituitary glands. When you say adeno, that means it's glandular. So any word that says adeno, that means it is glandular. Now, these are the hormones being stimulated by the anterior pituitary, that are produced by the pituitary glands rather. We have the thyrotrophic stimulating hormone, and its stimuli is the hypothalamus. So the TRH that we have mentioned beforehand, and it stimulates the thyroid glands to produce the thyroid hormone. We also have the growth hormone, also known as somatotropin. Again, its stimuli is the hypothalamus, particularly the G growth hormone releasing hormone. So it controls epiphyseal growth and protein production and regulates the use of energy. Then we have the adrenocorticotrophic hormone, hypothalamus. Again, the stimuli is there, over here. And it controls the release of adrenocortical hormones. Then we have the prolactin, so it stimulates the development of the mammary glands as well as the production of milk. And then we have the follicle stimulating hormone. Hypothalamus is the one of the stimuli, also the photoperiod, so we've discussed this also in grading. Environmental temperatures and pheromones. It stimulates the development of the follicles in the ovaries or the process called ovulation. So this initiates the process of ovulation. And then we have the luteinizing hormone or LH. It's usually the estrogen secreted by the ovarian follicles because this is the one that signals, okay, once the estrogen is being released, that means the Graafian follicle or the mature follicle has been released also. So that's a signal to the anterior pituitary glands to release luteinizing hormone in order for it to produce the corpus luteum. It causes the rupture of follicles and development of the corpus luteum. And then we have the interstitial cell stimulating hormone. This is the male equivalent of FSH, and it stimulates the secretion of testosterone in the interstitial cells of the testicles. Now, the second part of the pituitary gland is the posterior one, and it's also known as the neurohypophysis. So this one doesn't need the help of the hypothalamus. So it directly gets the stimuli coming from the nerves. First is the antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. Its stimuli is the status of extracellular fluid and plasma. So if the animal is dehydrated, this one will kick in. When you see antidiuretic, it prevents the animal from peeing, from urinating. So it's one of those control measures in case the animal is on the verge of dehydration. What it does is act on the collecting ducts of the kidneys and alters permeability to water. And then, as I mentioned, we have oxytocin. So it stimulates uterine contractions during parturition. So for those who didn't have breeding, for your benefit, parturition is the act of giving birth. And milk letdown hormone. So milk letdown will allow more milk to be secreted. Milk production is more on the prolactin side. Now we go to the thyroid gland. So we're starting from the head going towards the caudal. So from cranial to caudal. So the thyroid glands are located near the thyrohyoid bone of the hyoid apparatus. And it produces actually 3 hormones. 2 of them are actually thyroid hormone and 1 is calcitonin, which I have mentioned. Thyroid hormone, they have actually 2, the triiodothyronine and the tetraiodothyronine or thyroxine. Thyroxine is the one that is widely used for metabolism. So its stimulant is the thyroid stimulating hormone coming from the anterior pituitary gland, and it controls metabolic rate and is essential for normal growth. And then we have the calcitonin. So what it does is, its stimuli is again increased serum or blood calcium levels. And what it does is it decreases the resorption of calcium from the bone. So it deposits calcium into the bones. Next is the parathyroid hormone. So the parathyroid glands are just located below the thyroid glands. And what it does is, again, its stimuli is when there's a decrease in serum or blood calcium levels. And what it does is stimulated calcium resorption from bones and promotes calcium uptake from the intestines. Now we're in the pancreas. So the pancreas may be part of the digestive system, but it also, which is the exocrine part of our pancreas. However, the pancreas also has an um, has endocrine functions. And these are just different cells in the pancreas that produces hormones, starting with the beta cells. So the beta cells are the ones responsible in producing insulin. So insulin is being released by the pancreas, particularly by the beta cells, when there is increased blood glucose levels, especially after feeding. So what it does is to increase uptake of glucose into the cells and stores excess glucose as glycogen in the liver. So people with, I have a family member who is a diabetic. My grandmother was also a diabetic. Sadly, she passed on, and her diabetic gene unfortunately was passed on to one of her sons, one of my uncles. Now, he is an insulin dependent person. So every time he eats, every time right before he eats, he has his insulin shots, and it's very painful. And once you have depleted insulin, once these beta cells have already exhausted your insulin intake, you really have to measure it. One of the pitfalls of diabetes is you really have to manage your diet. That's the problem with diabetes. Now we have the alpha cells. These are the lesser known hormones in our that are being produced by the pancreas. Now, glucagon is usually stimulated when there is lowered blood glucose levels. So this is the opposite of insulin. So what it does is release of stored glycogen from the liver to be converted into glucose. Then the delta cells, we have the somatostatin. So mild inhibition of insulin and glucagon. It prevents wild swings in blood glucose levels. So it's the one that negates both the previous two hormones. So just in case. And then we have the pancreatic polypeptide. So its function is unknown, but most likely related to satiety, the feeling of being full in the hypothalamus. Now we go to the ovaries. Now I know some of you are already familiar with this. So the follicles are the ones responsible in producing estrogen. And its stimuli is the follicle stimulating hormone. So its action is signs of estrus. We've already known this in your production, in your breeding and genetics, and the preparation of reproductive tract and external genitalia for coitus. And then the other one is the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum is being formed when the Graafian follicle or the mature follicle has already been erupted just after ovulation, and this is the scar tissue. So this is the one that is responsible in producing progesterone, and its stimulant is a luteinizing hormone. Its function is to prepare the reproductive tract for pregnancy and the development of mammary glands. If the animal becomes pregnant, the progesterone will be the one maintaining the pregnancy. And lastly, we have relaxin. Relaxin is also being produced by the corpus luteum. So this is being released during late stage pregnancy, and this is the reason why the pelvic canal tends to get wider as the fetus develops inside the uterus. Then we have the testicles. So for the males, so they have testosterone, and the stimuli is the interstitial cell stimulating hormone, and it's the one responsible for the male characteristics and behavior, and also the development of the sperm cells. Now we go to the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are located just cranial to the kidneys. So they are divided into two: cortex, which is the outer part, and the medulla, which is the inner part. And take note of their germ layer origin. So the adrenal gland, we have for the cortex, they produce the glucocorticoids. So this is the one that produces the steroids. Actually, testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen are also classified as steroids. Later on in your reproductive physiology, this will be discussed even further. So cortisol in all domestic animals, including humans, cortisone is being produced in rodents and rabbits. So its stimuli is the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and it's the one responsible in raising blood glucose levels when we are in stress and reduce the inflammatory response. And then we have the mineralocorticoids. Example of this is the aldosterone. So its stimuli is the status of extracellular fluid and plasma. So it acts on distal convoluted tubules of the kidneys and regulates uptake of sodium and hydrogen ions. So this is one also of the hormones that regulates that's being regulated, especially when the animal has problems on the heart as well as hydration status. And then the cortex is also responsible for producing some sex hormones. For the males, you still have estrogen, but it's not being produced by your testicles. It's actually produced by your androgen. So if you do have estrogen levels, just minute, it's being produced by your adrenal cortex. For us females, we also have androgen with us. It's being produced again by the adrenal cortex, however in small quantities. So it balances out. And lastly, we have the medulla, and this is the one responsible in producing the adrenaline and noradrenaline, and this is sympathetic nervous system. So it's the fight, fright, flight syndrome. So it's the one that it's the survival hormone. So other endocrine hormones. So we have gastrin, which is produced by the stomach wall, particularly in the pyloric region. So later on when we have our digestive system, you're going to know where this is. It's stimulated by the entry of food at the cardiac sphincter. Gastrin stimulates the release of gastric juices from the gastric glands, and digestion begins. Secretin, which is produced by the small intestine's wall, and it stimulates the entry of food in the duodenum, and this hormone stimulates the secretion of intestinal pancreatic juices to continue the process of digestion. And then we have the chorionic gonadotropin for those with breeding. I know you're familiar with this. And for those who didn't have, this is actually produced by some animals that become female. And these are found in humans as human choriogonadotropin, and for horses, their pregnant mare serum gonadotropin or equine chorionic gonadotropin. For humans, it is detected in the urine, while for horses, it's detected in blood. So I just watched recently Godzilla 1998, and I think it was the lamest pregnancy test of all, because Godzilla happens to be a mutant reptile, and yet they used a human pregnancy test kit that only detects HCG. So that's the lamest sci-fi lamest pregnancy test on a sci-fi movie. So that's just a comment, but I think when you watch that movie again, you will be you you will be your scientific mind will just be, oh no, this is so lame. And then we have erythropoietin. So this was the one that is produced by the kidneys in response to low levels of blood oxygen. And it stimulates the bone marrow to produce erythrocytes, or the red blood cells. So erythrocytes, when the animal, by the way, if the animal has kidney failure, they also have, when the animal becomes kidney failure, that's most likely 75 to 85% of the kidneys is already damaged. And like the neurons, once the nephrons, which are the kidney cells, are damaged, they're no longer being regenerated. And this erythropoietin production is also being compromised to an animal that has chronic kidney disease or chronic renal failure. General notes for anterior pituitary glands. So this organ is divided into three parts: pars distalis, pars tubularis, and pars intermedia. Pars distalis is the largest, with composed of 5 populations of cells: the thyrotropes, that's producing the thyroid-related hormone; gonadotropes, those who are related to the gonads, those that influence the sex glands, sex organs; lactotropes, those that produce milk; corticotropes, those that produce um, the, the steroids; and somatotropes, which is the growth hormone. Pars tubularis is the upward extension of the adenohypophysis attached to the infundibulum, which is part of the brain. And pars intermedia forms the junction between pars distalis and pars nervosa, which is the source of melanocyte-stimulating hormone for your amphibians. The thyroid glands are usually composed of 2 lobes and is located under the sternocephalicus muscle. And the thyroid gland's vascular supply is the cranial thyroid artery, which is a branch of the common carotid artery. The carotid artery happens to be the one that supplies arterial blood, oxygenated blood to the brain. And its main vein is the caudal thyroid vein. This will eventually join the internal jugular vein. The parathyroid glands. So in most domestic species, they have internal and external parathyroid. For carnivores, external and internal parathyroid are close to the thyroid glands. So applied or clinical anatomy. So a decrease or increase in secretion of hormones can disturb the state of homeostasis. The cause may either be primary or secondary. When you see primary increase or decrease of the hormone, it usually involves the organ that synthesizes or secretes the hormone. Let's say primary goiter. So the problem is in the thyroid glands. But when you say secondary goiter, the problem there is in either the anterior pituitary or the hypothalamus itself. So get ready for a very long quiz involving the nervous system and the endocrine system. If you do have any questions, please do ask away. And so if you do have questions, just ask. And I'll see you on the next topic, which is the cardiovascular system.